The snow had fallen steadily for 3 days, blanketing Silver Ridge Mountain in an ethereal silence. From the air, the resort looked like a quiet jewel set in the wilderness. Rows of dark pine trees poking up from a white void, cabins nestled along the main lodge trail, and ski lifts cutting across the slopes like veins. The sun broke through in fragments, casting an eerie blue shimmer across the surface. David Carter zipped up his neon-red ski jacket and adjusted his goggles, glancing up at the sky. The clouds were beginning to bunch. The wind smelled metallic. Another storm was coming. "Let's make this our last run," he said to his wife Emily, who was crouched down beside their daughter Lily, helping her with the bindings on her skis. Emily looked up, her breath forming clouds in the air. "Agreed. It's getting colder. Fast." Lily, their 9-year-old, looked up at them both. "One more, then Coco, right?" David laughed. "That's the deal." The family had arrived at Silver Ridge 3 days earlier, a Christmas present. From David to his family, he had spent weeks planning it, booking the most remote cabin the resort offered, close enough to the slopes but away from the more crowded lodges. It was supposed to be the perfect winter escape. No phones, no deadlines, just snow and each other. And for a while it was. They had spent the first day on the beginner trails, reacquainting themselves with the snow. Lily had taken to it quickly, zipping down the hills with unfiltered joy. David and Emily had watched her, feeling the kind of warmth only a parent can feel. They had made snow angels, built lopsided snowmen, even tried ice fishing on the nearby lake. But today, the mood had shifted. Even before they reached the lift, the mountain had felt different. The air had grown heavy, the quiet deeper than before, not the peace of solitude, but the hush of held breath. There were fewer people on the trails. The lift operators were subdued. One, an older man with a deep scar across his chin, had given David a strange look before saying, "Storm's shifting. Wouldn't linger past sundown. Mountain changes when it's hungry." David had forced a chuckle, assuming it was some local superstition. Now, as they boarded the chairlift up the Eagle's Breath Trail, Lily bounced her legs excitedly. "I heard someone say there's a secret trail near the top," she said. "Like one that's not on the map." Emily frowned. "Sweetie, if it's not on the map, there's probably a reason. But what if it's just hidden? What if it's the most fun one and no one knows because it's secret?" David grinned. "Let's stick to the ones we know. Last thing we need is to get lost up here." But by the time they reached the summit, the wind had grown sharper. A new sign was posted at the top. "Caution. Extreme weather alert. Trails may close without notice. Proceed at your own risk." The trees swayed violently against the ridgeline. Snow whipped across the clearing in thin, stinging sheets. Still, they pressed on. The first half of the descent was smooth, powdery snow, gentle slopes, Lily laughing as she curved around the trees. Emily and David stayed close behind. Visibility dropped steadily, mist and snow thickening around them. That's when Lily saw it. A narrow split in the trail, marked by a tilted wooden sign barely visible through the white. "Timber Pass, not maintained." It curved away from the main slope, through a dense grove of pines. "Guys, look, I bet that's it," Lily called. David pulled to a stop, examining the trail. Not maintained means it's not patrolled, could be dangerous. But Lily had already skied toward it, pausing just at the edge. "Come on, it's just one quick run." Emily hesitated, then sighed. "She's going to drive us crazy until we let her. It doesn't look too steep." David gave in. "All right, but slow and close together. No racing." They followed Lily down the hidden path. For a moment, it was beautiful. Untouched snow, trees forming an arch overhead, muffled silence except for the swoosh of skis. But the trail grew narrower, sharper. It twisted between rocks, dipped unexpectedly. Then, a scream. "Lily!" Emily shouted. David skidded to a halt just in time to see small tracks veering off the path and over a ledge. Without hesitation, He plunged off the edge after her. Emily stood alone for half a second, frozen. Then she too disappeared into the white. Hours later, the mountain was silent again. A light snow had erased the tracks. The storm rolled in with force, blinding and merciless. By the next morning, the Carter family was missing. Their cabin sat undisturbed. 3 lift passes remained, unscanned, and the trail to Timber Pass was swallowed by snow. The wind howled through the canyon, kicking loose a fine spray of pine needles and dust. 5 years had passed since the Carters vanished on Silver Ridge. Most people had forgotten. Some had never cared. But in the quiet town of Larchwood, stories of the mountain still surfaced, over beers at the tavern, during power outages, or when the snow fell hard and fast. It was early spring when a trio of college students set out on a hiking trip through the lower trails beneath the ridge. Their names wouldn't matter for long. They were just kids chasing a thrill, unaware of the shadows hanging over the region. They found the first clue just before dusk, a bright pink glove, half buried in the melting snow near the mouth of Raven's Hollow, a narrow gorge that hadn't seen visitors in years. The glove was small, child-sized, faded, but still intact. One of the hikers, a pre-med student named Theo, picked it up without much thought, until he saw the name stitched on the inside cuff. Lily. "I think we need to report this," he said quietly. The others nodded. The next morning, park rangers combed the area. Within 24 hours, they uncovered more: a broken ski pole, a boot, and most disturbingly, a weather-damaged disposable camera wrapped in a plastic bag. News of the discovery spread fast. Detective Mason Graves, who had been a junior officer on the original search team in '97, was pulled out of early retirement to lead the reopened case. He arrived at the Larchwood station with a suitcase in one hand and a worn leather notebook in the other, the same one he'd used during the Carter investigation. He stared at the items laid out on the evidence table. Time had faded the colours, but the names were still clear. David, Emily, Lily. "Where the hell did this come from?" he asked the ranger. "Just off Raven's Hollow," the man replied. "But here's the thing. That area was searched back then, extensively. These weren't there." Graves frowned. "You're sure?" "We mapped every grid. I was there." The implications were clear and chilling. Someone had moved them. Later that week, the camera was developed by forensic techs in Anchorage. Most of the film was ruined, but 3 photos survived. 2 were standard vacation shots: Lily holding a snowball, Emily smiling at the trailhead. The third was different, a blurry image taken from inside what looked like a cabin. Snow pressed against the windows. In the background, a figure, barely visible, standing just outside the glass. No one in the picture was looking at it, but the lens had caught it. Just enough to suggest height, dark clothing, and, possibly, a face. Graves stared at the print for a long time. He flipped open his notebook, made a single mark. Then he made a call to Eliza Ventnor, a wilderness survival expert and tracker. "I need you at Silver Ridge," he said. "Bring cold weather, gear and 2 weeks' food. We're going back in." The road to Silver Ridge had changed little in 5 years. It still twisted through miles of forest, climbed past avalanche markers and rusted guardrails, and ended in a crescent lot choked by fir trees and silence. But to Detective Mason Graves, it felt different now, heavier, as though the mountain itself remembered. Graves stepped out of his SUV and zipped up his parka. The air was thin and dry, the way it always got in early April. The snow had begun to melt in places, revealing patches of frozen earth and brittle roots. Overhead, the sky was a deep cobalt, streaked with clouds like pulled wool. Eliza Ventnor arrived a half-hour later, her truck coated in salt and mud. She stepped out, lean and unreadable, her black hair tied back beneath a grey beanie. A large husky leapt down from the truck bed and immediately began sniffing the perimeter. "Place looks the same," she said, eyeing the tree line. "Feels worse," Graves muttered. They set up base in the old ranger outpost near the timberline. Trailhead, a squat log structure with a potbelly stove, 2 cots, and a wall of maps. Graves spread out the evidence photos, marking the locations where the new items had been found. The glove and boot were here, he said, pointing to the hollow. But the last photo on the camera, this window frame, I think it's from the hunter's cabin. Eliza raised a brow. That place is condemned. It's also a half-mile from where Lily went missing. She nodded slowly. Let's go there first. They hiked through thick snow and slush, following what remained of the abandoned trail to Timber Pass. The sun dimmed behind a veil of clouds as they moved, casting everything in a silvery glow. The trees creaked in the wind, shedding snow like falling ash. The hunter's cabin appeared like a ghost, grey and huddled beneath a rocky overhang. The windows were cracked or missing entirely, and the roof sagged under layers of ice. Still it stood. They stepped inside. The air was stale, thick with mold and time. The fireplace was filled with blackened logs. Dust coated everything, except for the far wall, there, a trail of footprints had disturbed the grime, leading to the broken window. Graves knelt. Someone's been here recently. Eliza pointed to a set of claw marks etched into the doorframe. Something's been here too. Graves followed her gaze. The wood had been gouged deeply, as if by an animal, but the spacing was off. Too regular, too deliberate. They searched the cabin in silence. In the corner beneath the cot, Eliza pulled out a fragment of red fabric, nylon, torn, partially frozen. A jacket? She asked. Graves took it from her. David's was red. As they left the cabin, the husky growled low in its throat, its ears pinned back, eyes fixed on the tree line. Something moved in the shadows. A flicker, tall, fast, impossible to define. Eliza unslung her rifle. Graves drew his flashlight and scanned the trees. Nothing, but the dog wouldn't stop growling. That night, back at the ranger outpost, Graves listened to the wind scrape across the tin chimney. The fire crackled beside them, but the warmth didn't reach far. He wrote in his notebook, the same line over and over, what survived that fall. Outside, somewhere beyond the veil of snow, something watched the light in their window and waited. The storm rolled in at midnight. Graves woke to the hollow thud of snow hitting the outpost's roof. The wind howled like a living thing, rattling the shutters and whistling through the old wooden seams. Across the room, Eliza was already awake, feeding the stove and muttering softly to the husky, whose ears twitched at every gust. "This isn't natural," she said, without looking up. "It's too early in the season for a system this strong." Graves rubbed the sleep from his face. "Or something doesn't want us here." By morning, 2 feet of snow had fallen. The trail to the hunter's cabin was buried, but Eliza insisted. They pushed deeper, toward a place called Black Hollow, a gulch that hadn't been marked on public trail maps since the 1970s. Graves had heard stories about it as a rookie. Strange echoes, shifting landmarks, and once, a pair of hikers who claimed they'd walked in circles for hours despite using a compass. They strapped on snowshoes and set off with the husky leading. The snowfall had stopped, but the air held a suffocating quiet. No birds, no branches creaking, only the crunch of their steps. Black Hollow appeared like a wound in the landscape, a gash of shadow carved between 2 ridges. Trees leaned away from it, as if recoiling. The descent was steep, slick with ice, and Graves felt his stomach twist as they reached the floor. There were signs of old life here, rusted tin cans, a collapsed tent, something that might have been a fire pit long ago. Eliza scanned the ground. "Boot prints," she whispered. 2 sets, small. Graves squatted beside them. The edges were fresh. One set was narrow, child-sized. The other dragged slightly like someone limping. "How long do you think?" "Hours, not days." Graves followed the tracks with his flashlight until they stopped abruptly at a copse of trees. Beyond them, the snow had been disturbed, not by footsteps, but by something heavier. Drag marks. A wide, uneven trail leading into a dark crevice in the rock wall. They approached slowly. The husky whimpered and stopped short. Graves shone his light into the gap. A dark tunnel yawned before them, hewn by nature but expanded by something else. Inside, the walls were etched with crude symbols, jagged lines, circles, and what looked like hands with too many fingers. "Someone's living down here," Eliza said. Or was. They didn't go far. The tunnel narrowed after 20 feet, ending in a chamber filled with old bones and cloth, a child's scarf, a woman's boot, a cracked ski goggle with a sticker still on it, property of Lily Carter. Graves stood in the dim light, heart pounding. "No bodies," he murmured. "No," Eliza replied, "just their lives." Before they could leave, they heard a sound, faint behind the wall, a scraping, like nails on stone. They didn't speak. They just ran. Back at the outpost, Graves updated his notes, a timeline, a list of items, a sketch of the cave's entrance. But one thing stuck in his mind more than any other. Lily's scarf had been warm, not frozen, not rotting. Warm. Outside, the snow began to fall again, gently now, like ash, and somewhere in the trees, something unseen followed their trail back through the dark. Graves didn't sleep. The wind had died down, but the memory of what they'd found lingered like smoke. He sat at the outpost's table, Lily's ski goggle in front of him, his notebook open to a blank page. For hours, he stared at the curved lens and the faint cartoon sticker, a smiling snowman now smudged by time and something darker. Eliza came in just before dawn, brushing snow from her shoulders. "I circled the ridge twice. Nothing followed us back," she said. Then after a pause, "Not on the surface." Graves finally looked up. "I've worked cases that turn my stomach. Homicides, missing kids, cold trails. But this?" Eliza sat down across from him. "This isn't just a disappearance. It's containment." Graves leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Eliza tapped the map they'd pinned to the wall, a topographical mess of ink, string, and pins. "The terrain isn't natural. Those symbols in the tunnel, the way the forest curves away from the hollow. Something has shaped this place. And it's not human." The husky growled then, low and quiet, its eyes fixed on the door. Both Graves and Eliza froze. The knock came 3 seconds later, 2 slow raps, not urgent, not accidental. Graves reached for his pistol. Eliza stood, rifle in hand. He opened the door. A girl stood there, thin, covered in soot and ice, her hair matted, her eyes wide and too dark. She looked 9, maybe 10. She said nothing, just stared. "Lily," Graves breathed. The girl blinked once, then collapsed. Hours later, wrapped in blankets and breathing shallowly, the girl still hadn't spoken. She didn't respond to her name. She didn't react to photos of her parents, but she flinched at the word Timber Pass, and again when Graves whispered, "Black Hollow." "She's traumatized," Eliza said. "Possibly feral, but she's not frostbitten, not starved, not even dehydrated." Graves looked at her. "Then where the hell has she been for 5 years?" They sent an emergency signal to the ranger station down valley. A snowcat would arrive by morning to evacuate them. But as night fell, again the girl began to murmur. At first it was nonsense. Repeated syllables, half-sung rhymes. Then came a name. "Whisper Man." Eliza froze. "Say that again." The girl shook her head rapidly, eyes wide, teeth chattering though the room was warm. Graves crouched beside her. "Who is the Whisper Man?" She pressed her hands over her ears. "He watches the white. He waits in the quiet. He makes you forget. And then she began to scream. They sedated her with the emergency tranquilizer Eliza always carried. She's been down there, Graves whispered. Not alone. Eliza looked out the window. Snow was falling again, soft and steady. But behind it, shadows moved. Graves turned the lock on the door. He didn't say it, but he knew something had come back with her. Snow muffled everything. The world beyond the outpost blurred into white haze. No edges, no sky. The trees were gone, swallowed by the storm. Inside, the silence was shattered by the girl's voice, not screaming now, but humming. A low, off-key tune that echoed faintly around the room like it had been heard before, a long time ago. Graves stood watch by the door, pistol in hand, every muscle coiled. She hasn't slept, Eliza whispered. She just hums. Graves stared at her. That song, I know it. It's an old folk lullaby. Appalachian origin, maybe older. I heard it once in a survival training module. A girl in Kentucky vanished for 3 days, came back humming the same tune. Graves said nothing, but his knuckles whitened. The generator sputtered. The lights flickered. Outside, something brushed the window. Eliza raised her rifle. There's nothing out there, Graves said, eyes on the girl. That's what scares me. The snowcat didn't arrive in the morning or the afternoon. Radio contact failed. The satellite phone picked up only static. The girl grew quiet. Then, as night fell, she began to speak. He likes the quiet places, the hollow, the ice, the white where no one remembers. Who? Eliza asked, kneeling beside her. He took them. Mommy, Daddy, but not me. Her lips trembled. Because I sang. Graves leaned in. Took them where? She pointed at the map, to a place not marked, the forest beyond Timber Pass, the gulch behind the cave, a spot simply labelled on an old park ranger's notebook as the throat. That night, the whispers began, first inside the walls, then beneath the floor, a soft, rustling murmur, like voices moving through snow. The husky whined, then howled, a long, mournful sound that ended abruptly. They found nothing but the door ajar and paw prints leading into the storm. Graves felt it in his bones. They were being watched, and not just by the Whisper Man. Something older, hungrier. They tried to sleep in shifts. Eliza kept a journal. Graves sharpened his hunting knife to keep his hands busy. The girl drew symbols in the frost on the window, crude, jagged spirals, and a tall figure with no face. He doesn't like names, she whispered once. Eliza, Graves said low. We need to leave. Tonight, she nodded. We'll follow her map, get through the throat, try for the old ranger line. They packed light, leaving behind food and warmth for speed. But as they stepped outside, the snow stopped, and in the stillness, a voice floated over the ridge, soft, measured, beckoning. It sang the lullaby. The girl turned to them. He's awake now. The trail narrowed into a ravine choked with gnarled pines and brittle ice. Graves led the way, his compass useless, its needle spinning erratically. Behind him, Eliza kept one hand on the girl's shoulder, the other on her rifle. The girl moved, with eerie calm, bare hands ungloved, eyes focused ahead like she knew exactly where they were going. They crossed into the throat at dawn. The snow deepened suddenly, swallowing their knees. The cold grew heavier, pressing against them like a physical force. Graves glanced back. No more prints, he said. Eliza looked down. Their steps disappeared as soon as they were made. Behind them, the world was smooth, undisturbed. Keep moving, she said. The forest changed. Trees bent toward each other, trunks twisted like old bones. There were no sounds. Not wind, not birds, not even their breathing. Only the snow falling without end. An hour in, they found remnants. An old ski pole, a half-shredded parka, frostbitten, boots melted into the ice. David Carter's, Eliza muttered, recognizing the initials burned into the plastic. Then came the voices. Faint. Familiar. Lily, a woman called. Eliza? Graves whispered, blinking. That sounded like, no, she said sharply. Don't answer. It's the snow. But the girl turned. They call. They always do. It's how he feeds. Graves pulled her forward. Clearing appeared, sudden and wrong, perfectly round. At its centre, a cabin, half buried in ice. Its roof sagged under snow. Frosted windows blinked black. The hunter's cabin, Eliza breathed. They approached carefully. Inside was dust and silence. Frozen food on the table. A radio dead in the corner, but everything looked fresh, as if someone had just left. Graves stepped into the back room. Photos, a woman, a man, and a girl, all smiling, all perfectly preserved. The Carters. But in every picture, the background shifted. Sometimes the forest, sometimes snow. But always, in the distance, a shadowed figure. No face. Eliza turned away. He's anchored here. This is where it started. The girl sat on the floor, humming again. She traced the spiral in ash. We can't stay, Graves said. This place, it's part of him. The walls creaked. The windows darkened. Outside, the snow began to rise. Not fall, but lift, swirling upward like smoke. He's coming, the girl whispered. He wants me back. Eliza loaded her rifle. Then we end this here. Graves looked at her. How? The girl stood. We sing. She began the lullaby. Slow. Certain. The storm howled in return, but somewhere in the noise, something screamed. Something not human. And the cabin shook. The scream that tore through the storm was not of wind or beast. It was layered, a choir of despair, each voice overlapping with another. Graves dropped to one knee, clutching his ears. Eliza grit her teeth and raised her rifle, her breath coming in short clouds. The girl did not stop singing. The spiral on the floor of the cabin began to glow faintly, pulsing in rhythm with her voice. The symbols on the walls, ones Graves had dismissed as scratches, lit up in lines of cold blue light. He's bound to the hollow, Eliza said, barely audible over the cacophony. The song. It's not just a ward, it's a command. Graves stumbled to the window. Outside, the snow was rising in a tornado of silence, white and infinite. A figure moved within it, tall, thin, bending in ways bones shouldn't. It had no eyes, no mouth, but still it watched them. He never left, Graves whispered. He waited here, all this time. The girl began to shake. Her voice faltered. He's in me. He made me forget. But I remember now. Eliza took her hand. Keep singing. You can lock him out. No, the girl said. I can only hold him here. One of you has to close the circle. The spiral on the floor flared brighter. Graves looked to Eliza. If this works, you'll be trapped with him, she said. Forever. He nodded. Then let's make sure it's worth it. The cabin trembled. The walls warped, as if the structure itself were trying to flee. The figure moved closer. It did not walk. It folded through space, each step a tear in the air. Graves stepped into the spiral. The girl sang louder. Eliza opened the old ranger's logbook and began reading the incantation carved into its final page, a mix of Old English and something older still. The figure screamed again. The cabin exploded with light. For a moment, Graves saw everything. The Carters, suspended in snow, memories scattered like glass. The Whisper Man's true face, a void of hunger and silence, and Lily, not as she was now, but as she had been the moment before she vanished. Then, white, Eliza awoke in the snow. The cabin was gone. So was the spiral. So was Graves. Only the girl remained, holding Eliza's hand. "He's gone," she said softly. Eliza looked around. The forest had changed, brighter, cleaner. No more whispers. No more weight in the air. They walked in silence until they reached the ridge. A helicopter circled above. Rescue. At last. Eliza looked down at the girl. "Do you remember your name?" She nodded. "Lily. My name is Lily Carter." And then, finally she smiled. But as the helicopter descended, Eliza noticed something in the girl's eyes. A flicker, like snow caught in a lens. Cold and endless. Something had come back. Not the Whisper Man. Something worse. 6 weeks later, the snow began to melt. Slowly, the mountain yielded its secrets. Fractured skis, old thermoses, half-buried goggles. Search crews combed through Timber Pass, now reopened to investigators after years of closure. But no one spoke of the throat. That part of the map remained deliberately faded. Eliza sat in a makeshift operations tent at base camp, wrapped in a wool blanket, her fingers trembling as she scrawled notes. Her face was thinner now. Haunted. Lily, the girl they called a miracle, had been taken back to the city, reunited with extended family, declared healthy. But no one asked what had happened during those 5 years she was missing. And Lily didn't tell them, except Eliza. She remembers everything, Eliza had said in her debriefing. She knows what it is, what it feeds on. It doesn't just take people, it erases them, bit by bit. "And Graves?" they'd asked. She'd paused. "He's still in there, holding the door shut." That night, Eliza returned to the cabin remains. It wasn't listed on any map, and yet she found it again. The place where the spiral had burned itself into her memory. The ground was scorched in a pattern that had never truly faded. Even, beneath the snow, she sat cross-legged in the center of the spiral. "I know you can hear me," she whispered. "I don't know if you're alive, or something else, but if you can hold it, I can find a way to end it." The wind stirred, and for a moment, it sounded like humming. Meanwhile, in the city, Lily stood before her bedroom mirror. She stared at her reflection, unblinking. Then she lifted her hand, and the mirror did not follow. The reflection smiled first. Below her bed, something whispered, not in words but in thought, cold and endless. She turned off the light. She didn't sleep. Back on Silver Ridge, beneath layers of ice and stone, Graves opened his eyes. There was no sky, no time, only white, and in the distance, something moved, slow, patient, hungry. He gripped the blade tighter and waited, not to escape, but to fight, until the mountain fell silent again. 10 years passed. Silver Ridge became a legend. Tourists stopped coming. The resort closed. Locals spoke of bad omens and buried trails, of whispers in the trees and the cold that never quite left. The mountain stood untouched, blanketed in silence. Eliza moved north, a cabin of her own, built of stone and steel. No phones, no visitors, just stacks of journals and a locked case under the floorboards. Inside, her rifle, old maps, and a child's scarf. She never stopped watching the weather. When snow came early, she would sit at her window, waiting. In the city, Lily Carter grew. She lived a normal life. On paper. Good grades. Quiet. Polite. But those who met her never forgot the feeling she left behind, like standing on thin ice, like being watched from a great distance. At night, she drew spirals on the wall. Her parents, her new parents, never asked where she went in her dreams. They didn't want to know. One December morning, the first real storm in a decade swept across the state. A single hiker went missing near Silver Ridge. The same week, children in a small town nearby began humming the same unfamiliar tune. Old trees cracked. Ice spread across windows from the inside. And, Deep underground, graves stood in a hall of endless frost, facing what he had come to know only as the others. Those consumed before, their souls bent, their memories fractured. But he still remembered. He still fought. Above, Eliza read the signs. She packed her rifle. Lily stood by her window, humming. She had not aged. Not really. Not where it mattered. She turned to the mirror. Her reflection smiled again. But this time, she smiled back. "Are you ready?" she asked it. And from the glass, the voice replied, "Always." On the day of the second disappearance, the snow fell heavier than it had in decades, and somewhere on the mountain, 3 lift passes fluttered out of the trees. Red, blue, pink, unfaded, waiting. White, silence had come again.